Now, women aren't going to be allowed in these pools at the same time as men, and they're going to have to be totally covered. But here's the interesting thing. They're going to serve halal food at these restaurants and cafeterias. Now, in order to sell halal food, no Christian or Jew can touch the food. What happened to the laws of the state of New York? Is Mayor Bloomberg not concerned about this? That there will be entire groups of people that can't be employed in certain jobs inside of this, whatever it is? And let's also talk about Islam in general in the United States in reference to this mosque. At least 85% of the mosques in the United States and 100% of the Islamic schools teach that democracy is an apostate religion that must be destroyed. A valedictorian graduate of the Saudi Islamic Academy in Virginia, a school which is attended by most of the children of the embassy staffs of Islamic embassies in Washington, D.C. This is where they go to school. The valedictorian graduate one of the valedictorian graduates is currently serving a life prison term for plotting and planning the assassination of President George W. Bush. Who can really believe that the teachings at Cordova House are going to be any different than they are in almost all the mosques and all of the Islamic schools in the United States? Who's willing to believe that'd be different? While Muslims in the far left are united behind this construction, and again, this is a marriage made in hell, while they're 100% behind the construction of this ground zero mosque, I am sorry to say that the right is not united against it. Citibank, AIG, and other major financial institutions, those two I mentioned because they're owned by the federal government, those institutions support Sharia finance and broker and sell Sharia instruments. Though Sharia finance is, of course, a part of Sharia law, and it has been used as an instrument in many countries. Economic conservatives, eager to make money from wealthy Islamic nations, back the mosque construction. And my office is in Washington, D.C. I could give you a litany of the conservatives, of the economic conservatives, among them American tax reform President Grover Norquist and his support of this mosque, along with his support of Go Proud, which boggles my mind, almost as much as the fact that he's married to a Muslim woman and gave the name of their child one Christian and one Muslim name. I can't figure it out. If you can, that's fine. Social conservatives point out that since the 9/11 attacks, nearly 1,000 churches, and this is what is in our commercial, since 9/11, nearly 1,000 churches and church-affiliated buildings have been burned or bombed or otherwise attacked and destroyed by Muslim raiders. Just since 9/11. Just since 9/11. We have a PowerPoint out at our booth. And in one of those PowerPoints, there's a photograph of myself in one of those burned out churches in Kosovo. In one day alone, 280 churches were destroyed in a pogrom in Kosovo. Remember that picture of one burning mosque in Serbia that CNN showed over and over again from different angles while Amanpour went on and on and on about the persecuted Muslims in Serbia? 286 churches destroyed in one day, and not one of them were ever reported by the major media in the United States. This year, during Ramadan, the holy month of Islam, it ended on September 11th. There were 226 Islamic terror attacks against civilians in the world during that 30 days. More than 1,000 people were killed and thousands more were injured. Now, I will grant that most of those attacks were Muslims killing other Muslims. But many of those attacks occurred in nations you probably didn't even know about. A truck bomb in China. 2 car bombs in a market in Russia. Churches in Nigeria destroyed. Attacks in the Philippines. Buddhists killed in Thailand. I just mentioned in the last 24 hours. The Islamic strength in southern Thailand is becoming greater and greater. The population is greater. And there are literally several terrorist attacks per week in Thailand now against Buddhists. You know what I think? And I think most social conservatives think. If the critics, and we are the critics of this Cordoba House, mosque or Rabat or whatever it is, and I do believe it is Rabat. We think if there are truly moderate Muslims in the United States, which, you know, that's a hard question. It's like, is Nancy Pelosi a Catholic? I mean, if you say you're a Catholic and you're pro-abortion, up to the minute of delivery, you believe that a woman can abort her child, and you believe that in same-sex marriage, and you claim to be a Catholic, are you a Catholic or are you an apostate Catholic? When we refer to moderate Muslims and claim that we know Muslims who don't believe in jihad, are they Muslims? But let's assume that there are moderate Muslims. Let's just assume that. And let's assume that those who want to build this Cordoba house are moderate. Let's just assume that for just a moment. Well, here's an idea. Rather than using $100 to $200 million to build this gigantic mosque, which would be empty for the most part, or Rabat, and the giant mosque they plan on building in Cordoba, Tennessee, I wonder why they want to build it there. Instead of building these giant mosques using principally Saudi money, how about using that money, if they want to build bridges, to go to the Middle East and to North Africa and to help rebuild the churches that have been destroyed by Islamic terrorists. That would be building bridges. And that is the single proof that this Islamic center on Ground Zero is not about building bridges. This center is about declaring victory and about having a toehold for further raiders to go further into infidel territory in order to do even more damage. Now, I want to cover one other item before I step down, and that is the entire misunderstanding, I believe, that our society has in the West. I travel a great deal in the Middle East, and as I said, one of the things that I deal with is the refugees, the Iraqi refugees and such. And when I come, Islam is understood by Christians in those countries, but I don't think that a core item of Islam is understood in the West and even by Christians. And I'll do this and then I'll step down because there are other things that must be done here. In the West, we have the family government. We have the church government. We have the civic government. And we have God's government in heaven. 4 separate governments. Now these governments interact with each other and they influence each other. But from the time of Moses, those have been separated to some degree. And I'm not talking about separation of church and state and absolute walls and this and that. But King David was not a rabbi. Okay? He just wasn't. Now, in Islam, there is one law. Sharia. It governs everything. It governs everything that occurs within the family. It is so specific as to tell you which hand you have to use when you wipe yourself in the toilet. That's how specific it is. What hand you eat with. Which shoe you put on first. Which foot you put your shoe on first. All of your relations with the church are not part of the church government. It is all one thing. Civic government has to conform to that. This is why the churches can't be rebuilt, can't be touched. This is why no Christian or Jew is allowed into Mecca. There is one government entity in Islam, and there is this constant drive to destroy any form of separate government, whether it's secular, whether it's a monarchy, whether the monarch even claims to represent Islam, in order to create one thing. Because the ultimate goal is the final caliphate that rules over the world in Dar es Islam. That's the only time that there can be peace. There's Dar es Har, that is the part of the world that is in war, constant war, as Islam needs to fight it in order to conquer it, in Dar es Islam, which is the world of peace. And until the caliphate comes, it is the duty of every Muslim to participate in the jihad, the war in Dar es Har, in order to crush the infidels so that they can have this perfect world of Dar es Islam. I think if we put this mosque in New York in that light and frame it in that, we know exactly what it is, and we know exactly why it has to be stopped. Thank you, and God bless you.